I've never been to the White House before, let alone been able to sit at a round table with the President of the United States and talk about something that I deeply care about, an issue that I have been harping on in Seattle for 15 years, and that is the scourge of left-wing violent extremism, mostly perpetrated by Black Bloc Antifa members, and the reality that elected leaders here, Democrats and the legacy media simply refuse to acknowledge the threat of Antifa. They refuse to acknowledge that Antifa even exists. So just kind of behind the scenes on how this all came together, and I want to get to the meat and potatoes of what we talked about during this roundtable. So just really fascinating, and a lot of good independent journalists and content creators on it. You know, I got a call late Monday. Hey, do you want to do a roundtable at the White House about Antifa? And I'm like, sure, let me clear my schedule, of course. And we didn't know that the president was going to be there. They just said that it's going to be, you, Andy Ngo, a few other people, and members of the administration. And so we figured maybe Pam Bondi or Kash Patel. And we didn't actually find out until a couple hours beforehand that the president was going to be there alongside Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary, and Kash Patel, the FBI director, and Attorney General Pam Bondi. So it was a whole big spectacle. And a lot of my favorite people were there, people who have done meaningful work on the ground. Katie Davis Court, she's been doing great work in Portland. Of course, Andy Ngo, who's the OG of uncovering and unmasking Antifa. Our friend Jonathan Cho, who had some interesting remarks about Antifa's intersection with the homeless industrial complex. But here's how President Donald Trump opened up the roundtable.
It should be clear to all Americans that we have a very serious left-wing terror threat in our country. Radicals associated with the domestic terror group Antifa that you've heard a lot about lately, and I've heard a lot about them for 10 years. And other far-left extremists have been carrying out a campaign of violence against ICE agents and other officials charged with enforcing federal law. And in Portland, Oregon, Antifa thugs have repeatedly attacked our offices and laid siege to federal property in an attempt to violently stop the execution of federal law.
And of course, this comes after President Donald Trump designated Antifa a terror organization. And I even had some questions after that about, okay, what does that exactly mean, right, for the prosecution of these cases? And I also understand that there are some challenges. This is one thing, the media will always hang its hat on this, and Democratic politicians, and Antifa is a figment of your imagination. It doesn't even really exist. And that's not true. They call themselves Antifa. It's Rose City Antifa is one of the original sort of entities, cells, if you want, of Antifa down in Portland. But I understand that it's a challenge to prove, is someone Antifa per se? But really it boils down to, what is their activity? What kind of activity are they engaged in? And you're prosecuting the activity, not the ideology anyway. You're prosecuting the activity, not the label anyway. And so Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel talked a little bit about, after that terror designation, what their strategy is moving forward.
We're not going to stop at just arresting the violent criminals we can see in the streets. Fighting crime is more than just getting the bad guy off the streets. It's breaking down the organization brick by brick. Just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach, President Trump, with Antifa. Destroy the entire organization from top to bottom.
What we are doing at the FBI is simple. It does not require rocket science. We are following the money. Money never lies. And that's what it's going to take to bring down this network of organized criminal thugs, gangbangers, and yes, domestic terrorists, because that's what they are.
Yeah, this was interesting because this was a line of conversation. And my argument has always been for the feds taking these cases. Clearly in places like Seattle and Portland, there is no interest, next to no interest or political will to prosecute these cases. There have been a handful over the years, but they're always pled down to something very minor. People don't really suffer any consequences. And that's why Antifa activity has gotten so severe here, because they get away with everything. So first and foremost, the feds taking over these cases and having the Department of Justice under Donald Trump that does consider Antifa to not only be real, but to be terrorists, that helps significantly. But as you go about proving those cases and trying to prove the structure, the conversation around tracking the money and using the resources of the federal government. I think a lot of my latest assault by Antifa at the ICE facility in Tukwila, Nobody's ever been arrested for that. I mean, I got wasp killer directly to the eyes and nobody was ever arrested, but the feds would have had different investigatory tools. I mean, they could have figured out cell phones in the area. Not that the Tukwila Police Department can't do that, but I don't think they're going to expend the resources to do that. So I think the feds could have come in there if they had that case from the beginning because, hey, that's ours. That's a terror, that's a terror organization. And then they could figure out and have, advanced surveillance technology, within the law, but figure out who they were. But Kash Patel brought up this tracking the money thing. And we talked a lot about that at the roundtable. And I think it's important. And that is a tool that the federal government has at its disposal. I'll tell you what, I think that they're going to find Antifa has ties to some very mainstream groups that are donors to the Democratic Party. And Democratic Socialists of America, one. I think that as a political party, absolutely. It's almost synonymous. You know how many DSA members are out there marching around in black bloc, wreaking havoc on our communities? So that's one, but some more mainstream ones, and I'm probably going to be, I don't know, they might even try to sue me over it. I bet you I would not be surprised. Can I say this legally? Yeah, I think so. I would not be surprised, in my opinion, if the FBI tracks money that's being used to fund these radical left-wing extremists, and some of that money is tied back to the teachers' unions. Wouldn't be surprised at all. And you look at and how many? It's a disproportionate number when we talk about the criminal activists who are arrested for acts of unrest. It's disproportionate how many of them are public school teachers and are members of the unions. So you don't think that some way, through some sort of back channel, they're providing some sort of help? I would not be surprised at all. I mean, look at the Washington Education Association running snitch lines for people gathering signatures to keep boys out of girls' sports. They're out there, and then people use those snitch lines and go out there and harass and destroy lawful signatures and commit crimes, undermine democracy, voter suppression. And to me, that's being done at the behest of the Washington State Teachers Union. Would not be surprised in any form or fashion if at some point the FBI is able to trace something back to the National Teachers Union. Wouldn't surprise me one bit. All right, let's get to my interaction with the president. Of course, I was, asking all sorts of people for advice. Because if you don't watch the show, maybe you're new to it today, I have a complicated history with my like/dislike for the president of the United States. Never really been a big fan. Of course, I went through a pretty significant red pilling that started mid-2020 because of the riots that were happening here, the lack of serious coverage that was given to them, and also our many mandates related to the pandemic and, how those were being handled and one-man rule and all these things. So it started to be on this red pilling journey that ultimately, about a year and a half ago, landed on me completely shedding my TDS and announcing that I was going to vote for the first time for President Donald Trump. So let's just say I never expected myself to be invited to the White House with President Trump and be able to talk to him about anything, let alone an issue I care so much about. So of course, first I just talked to him about the importance of, not only to me, but to other people in the room who've been assaulted and doxxed and harassed and threatened by Antifa, how important it is to us that he at least acknowledges the existence of them as an organization.
Mr. President, Brandi Kruse, you're going to hear us be very fired up today, and you can tell, and it's because some of us have been covering Antifa for 15 years and have never had anyone in a position of authority even acknowledge their existence. The single most powerful thing you've done to deal with this scourge has been acknowledging that Antifa is a real thing. I genuinely believe there would be people at these tables who would be dead today and would have been killed in Portland had you not called them a terror organization and said we're going to bring the full weight of the federal government to bear. I talked to Katie Daviscourt in Portland the other day. She'd been assaulted all summer. And she said the same thing. They didn't seem quick to violence as soon as you made that designation. So they're thinking in their heads, they're worried. There's been 24 or so arrested in Portland. They don't want to go to federal prison. There's this video of them, one of them who was in the face of an ICE agent, and then he's in custody shaking. Once you take the mask off, they're nothing.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that was important to relay to him is, yes, we were there to talk about what do we do actually to dismantle this organization so that once he leaves office, it can't quickly reform itself. But just the act, for all of us in the room who have gone through this, from my crew being mobbed in 2020 at CHOP, what I went through more recently at the ICE facility, it's deeply personal to us. And you could sense the anger amongst a lot of us about, toward the media and certainly toward politicians who will say, oh, that's not really happening. And, we have the scars to prove that it is and the video to prove that it is. So to have the president of the United States say, yes, Antifa is real. Yes, they're domestic terrorists, when we've been shouting it from the rooftop for 15 years, is incredibly meaningful to us personally, but I think also a meaningful step toward trying to thwart their criminal activity, because the weaker members of Antifa, the ones who really don't want to do hard prison time, I think that did make them think twice about, do I continue to do this? I also addressed, as did many on the panel, the media in the room. And that is an experience in and of itself. You see it on TV, these media scrums at the White House. I don't know how he does that every day it's like, and they just shout, and it was crazy. And it also got very vitriolic in there toward the media. And at one point, I actually kind of felt bad for the reporter from CNN. I was like, oh my gosh. But I just, going into this, we had and I'll just pull back the curtain a little bit. In the morning, we didn't even know the president was going to be there yet, by the way. I don't think. Yeah, I think I found out just after that. But we had a video call in the morning with Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, who was basically going to walk us through how the day was going to go. And she said, the real goal of today is for you to tell your stories of what's happened to you, what you've seen with Antifa, what you've discovered about Antifa. So the other media in the room, it hears these stories and is maybe going to report on it more honestly. And as soon as she said that, I said, that's like not my goal today at all, because I don't think that the media can be convinced. I didn't walk into that room at all thinking this is my chance to finally get it through to the mainstream news that Antifa is a real thing. And I said, that's just not going to happen. And that's what I told them to their faces.
Frankly, I could not care any less what any of you have to say about this meeting. Could not care any less. We're not here for you. I'm not here to convince any of you that Antifa is a real thing. Because if you have not come to that conclusion by now, you are never going to come to that conclusion because you don't want to see it. And you're going to go and you're going to say it's a bunch of right-wing conservative influencers who are here spinning a tale. I was one of you. I was a mainstream reporter in Seattle for 10 years. I was a TV reporter on the streets doing my job, and I was still assaulted by Antifa. So it's not about being conservative. It's about people who go there and show what they're doing. And when I saw, after all those years, that the media wouldn't be honest about what was happening, that Democratic politicians wouldn't be honest about what was happening, I thought, well, gosh, if they're not being honest about that, maybe they're not being honest about President Trump either. And it opened my mind to just looking at things for what they were. And now I find you quite funny, actually. Now, it's like I said, I'm much happier about it. But, for me, again, I could not care any less the stories that they go to print. This is what I care about. We have 3.5 years. Nothing is guaranteed, although I think if Democrats keep it up, we'll probably have Republican presidents for the next 3 decades. But nothing is guaranteed, and so what I want to see over the next 3.5 years is a full court press to dismantle Antifa once and for all in a meaningful way. I know, Andy, we talked before this about some ideas. That's really what we want to. I don't care what the media says. I don't care what Democrats say. They will never wake up to this fact. So we want the federal government to take as many of these cases as possible, look at the interstate travel between Portland and Seattle when it comes to these people who are committing violent acts, and hopefully in 3.5 years, they will be a shell of their former selves.
Very close to done, and it's Antifa and many others, unfortunately. Yes. There are many others, bad ones. Most have been named terrorist organizations. There are a couple that we're going to. But I think we've got it pretty well covered. But there are many others. But very specifically today, it's Antifa, and it's really bad.
Yeah. So that was the gist of it. We don't need to waste our breath anymore trying to get the media to cover Antifa, trying to get the media to cover left-wing extremism, trying to get Democrats like Bob Ferguson and Attorney General Nick Brown in our state to take it seriously. And Nick Brown will fall on I prosecuted some of the people from the summer of 2020 when he was the United States Attorney in Seattle, and he did. But these were like 2 people who lit cop cars on fire and stole rifles out of those cop cars. And by the way, my security guard was the one who disarmed them of those rifles, which later everyone lied about, but it's okay. So yeah, he prosecuted a couple of cases, but there could have been thousands of cases to be prosecuted from the summer of 2020. Think of how many cases went unprosecuted. We still have murders from CHOP that weren't even solved. And I bet if the feds had been on it from the beginning and they had said, we're taking all of these cases, they would have solved all these things and they would have made sure we're going to prosecute this behavior. I mean, the warlord of CHOP, who got taxpayer funds to help build like a rap studio or something, he was handing AR-15s to random kids on the street out of the trunk of his car to patrol CHOP as like CHOP security for the autonomous zone. So, they had no interest and showed no interest in prosecuting even very severe instances during 2020 where I think the feds would. And so that's where we need to go from here. Screw the media, screw the Democrats. If they haven't been convinced by now, they're not going to be convinced. So we don't have to. Now, the moment you probably saw everywhere, which I had asked a bunch of people, like I said, what should I say to the president? And I text Nicole, and Nicole loves that I love the president now because, love's a strong word. Look, I'm still critical of the president sometimes when I need to be, and I think that's appropriate. If I'm ever incapable of being critical of any politician, then I should just quit the show because then what use am I? But I told Nicole, I said, I'm going to tell him that I had TDS. Nicole's like, do not do that. I'm like, no, I think I'm going to tell him that I had Trump derangement syndrome. And so I was like feeling out the vibe, and he came in, he was in a great mood for reasons you'll find out momentarily, but he was laughing, he was joking. And I'm like, I think that I can tell the president about my former bout with TDS. So here's that moment.
I was told by probably a dozen people not to tell you this. I'm going to tell it to you anyway, because it's relevant to what we're talking about. I'm living proof that you can recover from TDS. I had strong Trump derangement syndrome for probably 8 years. This is one of the reasons I recovered from it. And by the way, it's much better to not have TDS. I'm happier, I'm healthier, more successful. I even think I got a little more attractive after I got rid of my Trump derangement syndrome. Yes.
The president of the United States called me very attractive. It was funny, I don't have it, but there was like a Daily Beast article that's like, President Trump, 81, makes creepy remark toward fangirl reporter, 37. And I was like, okay, how can you be offended if I'm not offended by it? And I brought up my looks, and it is true. We all know it. This is the glow of someone who has shed their TDS and their unhinged hatred toward Donald Trump. I have gotten better looking, okay? And it just is true. It is what it is. But I'm glad that I told him that. And I think, but it is about the reason we were there. This, maybe more so than any reason, is why Democrats and the media should take Antifa seriously. This is one of those issues that should be a no-brainer, but for political reasons, they just feel the need to push back. But look at me as an example. 10 years, let's go back even shorter than that. 2 years ago, if you told me I'd vote, I would have never considered voting for Donald Trump. 3 years ago, I wouldn't even call myself, I didn't even consider myself a conservative. 10 years ago, I was voting for Hillary Clinton. And so you look at how far I've come, and in part because of reasons like this. The Democrats and the media drove me into the arms of Donald Trump. Quite literally. I shook his hand, so into his arms. No, but you know what I'm saying is that if not for any other reason, it's like the radical gender ideology issue.
I also believe they
cling
drove
to
you
it.
out.
Yeah, it's like the radical gender ideology issue. They cling to it, even though they know that it is deeply unpopular. And they'll bully, teen girls who are trying to stand up for themselves. And they do that to their own detriment. Then fewer people trust the media. If they won't cover that issue, they're calling men, women, all this. Fewer people trust the Democratic Party or think they're sane. So like with the Antifa thing, this has been one of my biggest issues that has red-pilled me over the years. Covering everything that I've covered, all the political violence, everything I've seen and witnessed with my own eyes and endured myself, and to watch Democrats act like it wasn't even that bad. It's, the fiery but mostly peaceful summer of love. And it's like, good Lord, I just had enough of it. And there's many other things, their failure to address the homeless crisis, the crime crisis, the drug crisis, the overtaxation, the fact that Seattle and Portland have become, shitholes, so to speak, and nobody seems to mind. And all they're doing is losing their minds over Donald Trump as a distraction mechanism. So that's kind of why I wanted to point that out is look, I had a bad case of TDS, end stage TDS. But I was able to turn it around because of how crazy the Democratic Party and the media has been. So that should be kind of a warning to them.